y'all. Welcome to another episode. This is the second episode of the new season that is called The Art of the Con. So I had a lot of time to think about all the comments and critiques that I got from releasing the last episode, which was about 2 weeks ago, and it was the tell-all. I still think that it's worth to do. It was hard for me to get some of that information out there because personally embarrassing to me, but I think the message and the lesson learned is important, so I'm going to move forward with this season. Okay, so as you know, obviously the relationship ended. In hindsight, it's a great thing that it ended. I'm in a much better place financially, especially. At this point, the only thing that I'm paying of CG's is monthly insurance. He's paying the car payments. It's about to be April, so he's caught up right now. He walked out in November, so I paid November, December, January, February, and of course about to be April, but I'm just paying the insurance. So I could be worse, right? Okay, so I don't know if he's an actual narcissist or not, or if he just has like tendencies, or he's on the spectrum, or honestly, he could just be a giant asshole, right? But I do have to say that this event, like everything that's happened with him, has made me very interested in this subject, right? So I've been doing a lot of like Google researching, a lot of TikTok videos, a lot of Instagram, just a lot of just like Google information. I have one of my dates who is an actual therapist, which I know some of you think that's hilarious, but anyway, so he's a good guy. I wish we lived in the same state because I would, definitely be hanging out with him more, but he's an actual therapist. So I actually called him this morning and like badgered him to listen to like my last episode, and we had a good phone call this morning, so I definitely appreciate him for it. And he basically is in the same belief that I am, I think, for the most part, right? So in order for somebody to be diagnosed as a narcissist, right, they have to actually be diagnosed. There's this book that's called Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. There's a 5th edition, so a lot of people refer to it as DSM-5. When I asked my friend about this the first time, months ago, what have you, he had me refer to it. And then most people have to have like 5 of these tendencies before they are actually diagnosed as having or at least being a narcissist. So depending on where you read, right, there could be like 5 different narcissists up to 14 different kind of narcissists, and they all vary. In my Google, YouTube scholarship that I'm working on, or not scholarship, but degree that I'm working on, I would say that CG falls in plenty of these, but of course, who am I? I'm not going to say he's an actual narcissist, but what they look for basically for the traits for like somebody with NPD, is a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, lack of empathy, and an internal entitlement, exploitative arrogance, and envy. So like if 5 of these are met, then for the most part, somebody's diagnosed. But anyway, so I don't know if he is or isn't, but I do find the subject fascinating. I can share my story, right, in hopes that my story helps you in some way. So my story with CG begins with love bombing. Okay, so as you guys know, right, if you've been following my podcast at all, I got divorced in early 2020, right? Was dating like off and on. I probably, probably wasn't ready to date. I probably just needed more like self-time, more like, self-improvement, self-care, like more me time. But I did go out and, those first few dates, as you guys know, started the podcast. So I'm grateful for that. I some of those dates, have actually become really good friends of mine, like for real. So I'm really grateful for that. But anyway, so I was like dating, nobody serious. Christmas was approaching. My birthday's November 30th. So like you guys know, like I always like tease my mom that, my birthdays were always like celebrated with my family after Thanksgiving because, my birthday is November 30th. Thanksgiving was before, or she would like celebrate it late for Christmas. It's just good fun. Anyway, so I always talk about my birthday on social media because birthdays are like really important to me and others. Anyway, so CG and I met on Facebook about, I would say probably now about 13, 14 years ago. I was heavily involved with CrossFit. I'm actually back in the CrossFit family and I am so excited, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, so he and I met with mutual friends, I would say like around 2008, 2009-ish. We had, at that point, with my Facebook, I had over 5,000 friends and followers. And I know that because every time I tried to add somebody, it was the limit. It wouldn't let me. So eventually over time, I realized, why am I sharing so much of my life with the people I don't know? Excuse me. So I ended up cutting down that number to, I think I'm like at 700, and I'm proud of that because it's people that I actually know or care about in some way at this point versus the other 5,000 that I barely knew. Anyway, so he and I met because he was running a gym that was not CrossFit related, and he didn't have like a CrossFit title, but he was basically doing CrossFit. He was like one of the illegal guys doing that back then, but a bunch did. Anyway, so he had a gym, and he would post a lot on Facebook. And he and I became connected with mutual friends. Like I think at one point we had like 200 mutual friends. I think now we have one. Anyway, so I always followed his life because he's one of those people that post a lot, like 15, 20 times a day. Like it was mostly memes. He would like post, heart post, what have you. So his name became familiar, like over like the 10-year time, right? So my birthday was approaching, I was talking about my birthday, right? Because I was talking about my birthday, and it was going to be the big 50. And I don't know if how well you guys know me or not, but I actually love getting older. Like I think it's fucking awesome. Like I'm very happy that I'm going to be lucky enough to be 53 soon. Anyway, so my 50th birthday was approaching, and I was talking about social media, and of course like all the memes and jokes and everything. And then of course people were like, what was George Washington like when he was young? Anyway, all those kinds of jokes, so fun. Anyway, CG and I had gotten to like a conversation on Facebook, right? And Facebook Messenger. And we were like, cause I was, talking about my podcast, and he asked me about like an air conditioner for an ex that he was with, that he wanted to get her one or what have you. So he was asking me about that. It was random. And then, getting closer to my birthday, right? Then we started chatting, and, I was the one who was kind of like, we should meet for a beer, like one of these days. Cause, I've seen your life unfold. Like I've seen your two daughters grow, I feel like I know you, but obviously I don't know you. And it took him a couple of days to just like kind of pivot and then realize that he was interested. And the love bombing began. And I didn't know for the longest time that it was love bombing. Like, as you know, he left in November. So I got the idea that he may or may not be a narcissist based on a lot of my friends and family's comments. So I started researching, right? Well, looking back, holy shit, I was love bombed. So love bombing to me is probably one of the most insidious things you can do to a person, because once you love bomb someone and they get like attached to you, it's actually pretty awful because it's a form of manipulation. And it's awful because there's like different stages to it, right? So it starts with like overt, over the top love bombing, right? Like somebody will meet you in person. In my case, it was like, Facebook Messenger. And then of course we met in person for Christmas later, but whatever. So we started talking, like over Facebook Messenger, and then we started doing like phone calls, right? Like late at night. And we talked every day, and most of our phone calls averaged like 3 hours a night. Like I remember going to work like tired as fuck, but I felt so good and elated because like those 3-hour phone calls that had become nightly at that point, CG was very like, oh my God, you're like my soulmate. You're like the person I've been looking for my whole life. I never felt this connection, before. I've been married twice, and this is amazing. And I'm in Nebraska and you're in New York. And, if I didn't have my girls, like I would move in with you like right now. Like everything was like very like overt, and like everything was a grand gesture. And his first gift to me, we had not met in person, by the way. His first gift to me was 50 red roses. And he sent them to my house with a little note that said something like, fuck 50, you're fabulous, something like that. And I remember I was walking Ike, in New York, at my rental house there. And I remember like walking, and I was like, what is that box like on my, my driveway or my little patio thing? And I opened it, and I was like, holy fuck, it's 50 red roses. And I remember calling my mom, and I was like, I haven't met this guy yet. And then my mom and I were kind of like, that's awfully romantic. And I was like, it's kind of extravagant though, right? And she's like, yeah, but she was like, just go with it. She was like, just enjoy it. It's just roses, So I was like, wow. So I didn't even have a vase like large enough for 50 like red roses, because who does? Holy shit, not me. So I called him, I thanked him. I was a little like teary eyed. He was very romantic and sweet and over the top. And he was like, you deserve so much more. You're so awesome. I've been telling all my friends and family about you. Can't wait to meet you, for Christmas, what have you. So it was like very over the top, right? So that was probably the beginning of it, I would say, right? Because we hadn't met in person yet. Once we met in person, we had decided to meet, for Christmas, like you guys know, the Hallmark movie kind of thing, right? So that in itself was probably over the top and too much of a grand gesture as well. And when I was talking to my friend, the therapist this morning, he was just like, love bombing is a new phrase. And he was just like, why can't somebody just be romantic? He was like, does it have to be like a negative connotation? And he's right. It doesn't have to be, right? There could be the old school fucking guy out there somewhere who's just like knocks on my door, which is creepy because nobody does that anymore in 2024. But anyway, the theory is there could be like the really nice old school guy who's just like, hi, Tracy, nice to meet you. Here's a rose that I found, or here's a fucking sunflower, daisy, whatever. That's sweet and that's romantic, right? Like I've been on dates and guys have given me like a bottle of bourbon. I'm like, fuck yeah. So that's just a good, sweet, romantic, good first impression. So I think that's totally different. Like I think being an old school romantic chivalrous guy, I think is awesome. Like I appreciate chivalry. I mean, I'm like, I pay my own bills. I have like a Jeep I love. I have this like house I love. Just bought a bunch of like fucking cute furniture for it. So I'm independent, but I love like chivalry. I think chivalry is awesome. Just because I can fucking do everything myself doesn't mean I can't be romanced, right? Anyway, so the 50 Red Roses, I think, was kind of like the beginning of the love bombing, right? So I called him, thanked him for the red roses. And of course, he was, incredibly flattery and was just like, tell all my friends and family how awesome you are. And he was talking about how, at this point, he was date number 69. I hadn't met 68 yet. Ironically, I just saw his profile show up on my Facebook thing. I don't know if I'm going to reach out to him yet or not. But anyway, I hadn't met 68 yet. So 69, which is CG, was trying to close the deal, which is what love bombers do, right? So love bombers, for the most part, they're trying to get you attached to them, and they're doing it because of manipulation. They want to control you eventually, right? So basically what they're doing is like it's over the top, right? So he was telling his friends and family how smart I was, how funny I was, how cool I was. Like I have like a bug out bag, like I love weapons, like I'm in the army. Like he was just raving these traits that he thought were cool in me to them. So he was like raving. Then he started going to social media, because we started being more, I guess, public on social media, I guess. And this is all before we met. Like before we met, he would heart and like everything. It was a little creepy, kind of like he did, I told you with S in the last episode, right when he was having an affair with her. From where I was sitting, I had been single for like a year and a half, 2 years, there's something like that. I hadn't been in a relationship. So all of a sudden I'm getting 50 red roses from a guy that I think I can trust because we had like 200 mutual friends or something ridiculous like that, right? So I think I can trust him. He's very flattering. We have these really long like phone calls at night. He says all these sweet things. He's really funny. He's listening to my podcast. He's listening to like almost an episode of my podcast. We're talking about it. That's when I realized, he's probably mirroring a little bit. Like he's, liking things that I like. But I think for the most part, when you're dating somebody initially, that's what you kind of do, right? Like, for example, I love horror movies, right? So I might be talking to a guy like on first date somewhere. I'm like, oh my God, I saw this slasher. I saw this horror movie. Oh my God, I just saw Roundhouse, the new one with the knife stabbing. And I'm like, fucking love it. So somebody who is dating me may not like those movies as much or those scenes as much, but might be like, oh, that is a really cool movie because they want to make a good first impression, right? So there's that, and then there's the romance, but also there's the creepy level of it, right? Like if you're pretending to like everything that I like, that's love bombing. That's basically like if you're saying I'm your soulmate, and we haven't even met yet, that's love bombing. That's a little creepy too, right? So basically for the most part, like love bombing, like they go over the top, right? Like the red roses. He was talking about if his kids were older, or if he didn't have kids, he would move in with me. Like that immediate move in, that's kind of creepy, right? He was talking about me not meeting 68 because he wanted to be in a relationship with me. We hadn't even met in person yet, right? So my birthday's November 30th. We meet about 30 days later. That first weekend, he's immediately like, yeah, I really don't want you to date anybody. I really want you to, to stay focused on me. And I'm like, holy shit, like we just met. So I remember having like red flags in my head, and like I was thinking this is just moving too quick, like he's too over the top, with Facebook. I'm not that funny. I mean, I'm funny, but I'm not that fucking funny, right? Like he likes and loves everything I post, talks about friends and family, like on almost all the comments it's like how beautiful I am, like how sexy I am, which if you know me, I'm not fucking sexy. I'm kind of nerdy and clumsy, but anyway, like the whole thing is like he's very like like overt. He's like over the top, you know? So these phone calls that we had specifically, you know, there was usually, it averaged 3 hours a night, you know, for the most part, you know, during this stage. He would put his 2 girls on speaker so I could talk to them. And I remember thinking, it's like too much too soon. Like, I haven't even met you in person. Why am I talking to your kids on the phone? I just felt like it was too much, right? Anyway, so basically what happens with love bombing, for the most part, from what I have read, right, is somebody is trying to manipulate you. And then it goes through cycles, right? So they're trying to manipulate you because their ultimate goal is to control you, right? So basically there's 3 stages of the love bombing, and it's basically intense idealization. I struggle to say that word. Basically they're putting you on a pedestal, right? Like, he gave me the 50 red roses, talking to his friends and family of how awesome I was. Just over the top, you know, like I saw a Benchmark knife that I really liked in a store when we were together. It was like $225. He bought it for me. I found out later he couldn't afford it. I don't even know how he did it. But he did that. Like, that was his grand gesturing. That was his, like, idolizing me, putting me on a pedestal, like telling his daughters I was awesome, right? His friends, family, everything. And then you reach the stage, which I think for the most part, whether you're a narcissist or you have narcissistic tendencies or what have you, I think for the most part, you meet somebody, you like them, you're hooked, you're kind of infatuated somewhat. So it's like this intense, like you're putting them on a pedestal. This guy's cute, this girl's cute, whatever. But then what happens with people with narcissistic tendencies is once that fades, which I think for the most part, it fades for everybody, right? Like, I remember my 3rd husband, you know, Wes, talk about him a lot, right? It was a good marriage. We got along really well. There was no love bombing. It was just kind of like, it felt like an old shoe you'd put on in a good way. Like, you know, we just felt really comfortable. Like, we didn't have these weird stages of like this intense romance. And then the next stage is devaluation. So my ex and I never fought. I've talked about it here before. We had disagreements, of course, but we never had an argument. We never called each other a name in any way. So that to me was new, because that was something CG did a lot, and that actually falls into a narcissistic trait. Like I said, I don't know if he is or not. He could just be an asshole, but I do like this subject because it is enlightening for me and for other people, right? Okay, so there's the intense idealization, right? They're putting you on a pedestal. Then they start devaluing you, and the devaluing you is basically a way for them to start the cycle of like, it's the beginning of a trauma bond, which I'll talk about in the next episode. But basically, they're devaluing you because somebody with narcissistic tendencies, for the most part, has very low self-esteem, right? And they need what they call supply and love and admiration from other people, right? So they have this like grandiose image of themselves, right? And in order for them to feel good and whole for whatever reason, whether it's genetic or their early relationships with their family, what have you, in order for them to feel whole, they need to take, like, they're kind of vampires in a sense. They need to take that energy and admiration from other people, right? So when CG was building me up, when sending me roses and telling his friends and family that I was awesome and cute and smart and what have you, it was really, all of that energy was going to his self-esteem, because in his mind, from how I understand it and how it makes sense to me, looking back at our last 2 years, is when he would compliment me, in a sense, it was like him basically stroking his ego, saying, wow, this girl who's in the army, you know, who's like bug out bags, you know, who's just funny and smart or what have you. This girl thinks I'm cool. So that boosts his ego. If that kind of makes any sense, that's basically where the supply comes from, right? So as our relationship went on, especially last year, and he started cheating on me in July with Ellen and with S and with who else, who knows, it was because our relationship was coming to an end, because I think towards the end of that time, I was realizing that he's basically using me for money and for food and Airbnbs and hotels. And then he started saying things like he didn't want to move in with me. And then, of course, I found out he was cheating. So I think what happened in our scenario is he had this mask on. I thought he was like a really cool, sweet guy, right? And then I realized he wasn't. So I think as the mask was falling off, I think that's when he started looking for what they call more supply, right? Because I was giving him less admiration, because of course I'm kind of like, this guy's kind of using me for like drinks and food and Airbnbs and hotels. And it was beginning to bother me, right? So I think since those things were bothering me, of course I was stroking his ego less, right? Like if you feel like somebody's using you, you're not going to be like, oh, damn, you look great in those jeans, right? Like you're going to admire somebody less. So I think looking back, especially doing the little bit of reading that I'm reading, like YouTube and Google and what have you, and then TikTok, and then, picking my buddy's brain who's an actual therapist, I think that's what happened in our relationship, right? So I think that's why I think he's always been a serial cheater, but I think in his case, I think he does it because it strokes his ego. Anyway, so the devaluation basically happens when they make you question things, right? So right around July, like I told you guys in the last episode, I felt like something was off and I started questioning him. And then I found out later that he actually had been cheating on me. It was interesting to me because I didn't realize at the time, but he was flipping things, because he was like, before I caught him, or before, A sent me the message and he was caught, he was just kind of like, I don't want to be with somebody who doesn't trust me. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, but I'm getting these weird vibes. Like, you have your phone away, you have your phone hidden. You just seem distracted. We're not having sex as often. So I'm always like, if you're having sex less often with me, chances are you might be having sex with somebody else. So I started questioning things, right? Like I talked about in the last episode. And instead of him saying things like, what can I do to make you trust me? He would say things like, you're crazy. You take things too seriously. You're too sensitive. This is all a form of devaluation, which kind of makes you question your self-esteem and your self-worth, right? So gaslighting and all of this kind of goes into play, and I'll talk about trauma bonding a little bit more and gaslighting a little bit more, but I find it completely fascinating. So love bombing, like I said, it's like the intense idealization. It's the devaluing, right? Because they basically put you on a pedestal, and then they make you question who you are, and they make you feel like you're a little crazy, right? And they do this to manipulate you. And then when the mask starts to fall off, or once you start to set boundaries, that's when they discard you. So the discarding phase is probably the most hurtful. I think anybody who breaks up with anybody in any kind of relationship, whether it's friendship, work, long-term, short-term, what have you, I think for the most part, it hurts to be like, all of a sudden you're like, you feel like you're soulmates with somebody. In our case, we were looking at buying houses together. And then all of a sudden, bam, he just like walked away without saying goodbye. That's a discard. That's basically him realizing he can't get any more supply or any more admiration or any more good energy from me. So he started getting it from S and was trying to get it from Ellen and God knows who else, right? So I think the discard in his case happened because he secured a new supply, right? Like when he left me that November 14th, that Tuesday, he was on his way to visit Ellen in Chicago, right? So like he thought they were going to have like a weekend together. So that's why for him, it was easy to just be like, well, I'm just leaving Tracy while she's at work because I'm going to go see Ellen, right? So he had that one supply picked out, right? So for me, throwing me away was so super easy because he was on his way to her, right? So, and then there was other people, right? So the other thing that's fascinating to me about all of this is it all kind of makes sense, right? I don't know if CG is an actual narcissist. I do see some correlations within the tendencies. To me, he kind of fits all the channels, but whether he is or isn't why I'm here. It isn't why I'm sharing this. I want to share this because this is what happened to me, right? And as I said before, nobody warned me about him. He has a pattern of doing this his whole life, but I didn't know about it until it was too late. For me, it's too late for me. So as I said, I'm doing this because I want to educate us all somewhat, right? So if you're going on a date and you feel like, oh, you have a friend or family member who's on a date and getting love bombed, it creates like this like psychological cycle that's really damaging. And if I can save one person, as I always say, then everything that I do on this podcast is worth it, right? So love bombing for me was very over the top. It was like social media, friends and family, telling his daughters how awesome I was. Like it was all of the roses, like this knife that I knew he couldn't afford. For me, that was a love bombing. He hooked me, right? Because I had been single for a couple years. Like I was going on dates, but I hadn't had a romantic spark. And I think the love bombing for me is what got me hooked. And once I was hooked in this cycle, I didn't know it. It was a cycle of manipulation. I would go through like being put on a pedestal to where he would insult me in some way, and then he would discard me. But the discard, as I said, the final straw when he finally discarded me was November 14th. But these cycles can go through smaller cycles, right? Like, I said, my ex, my third husband and I, we like never fought. CG and I kind of fought somewhat. I wouldn't say a lot. We didn't see each other that much in person, but there was definitely like moments where, because he was always like a great communicator, I thought, right? He would always like text me in the morning, text me in the afternoon, text me in the evening. We'd have long phone calls. We do FaceTime. We do Facebook, like, communication. Like, we talked virtually every day, all day long, which is why it was so shocking to me when I realized he was cheating on me. But anyway, so the discards would happen occasionally. Like, he would be angry with something I did or said, or if a lot of times I would not answer the phone when he would call, like I was at work or whatever. And when I would call him back, he was always like, oh, well, I didn't think you'd ever call me back. Like, all of that's a form of devaluation. Like, that's a form of him. That's a way of him trying to manipulate me, right? So that way, when the phone rings again, I don't want to hurt his feelings, so I jump at it. But I don't know. There's so many things that we can talk about with just different traits of narcissism and, like just NPD in general, and then love bombing. But I do have to tell you, with love bombing, it's like that old school fucking phrase that we've all heard, right? If you meet somebody, male or female, and they're giving you all sorts of over the top gestures and it feels and sounds too good to be true, motherfucker, it's too good to be true. Specifically in my case, right? I hope that this episode somewhat helps. I will definitely go into more detail about trauma bonding on the next episode. It all kind of goes together. I hope that this at least helps you question some of your relationships with your friends and family. I hope this helps enlighten you. I would love to spare feelings for other people out there. I hope that CG's next girlfriends, whoever they are in the future, somehow find this and at least somewhat take care of themselves and somewhat protect their egos, because once you're a love bomb and you end up like in this trauma bond cycle, it could be really damaging for like months and years. And I think I'm okay. I've gone on a few dates since November, but I don't think that I'm in a place where I should be getting into any kind of like relationship with anybody else, because I feel like it's not good for them. I need to work on my own shit, and I think that's okay. I think all of us need to be alone and work on our own shit, because we'll end up being better people for the next guy is out there. I want to be a fucking good version for him, and that's how I feel like we should all be, Anyway, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'm always here. If you're being fucking love bombed, please realize that if it is too good to be true, it is fucking too good to be true, right? If you are being love bombed, or you're not sure if you're being love bombed, take a step back, see what your friends and family say about it, because your friends and family always have a view that you don't have a fucking view of, right? Set boundaries. If the person that's love bombing you doesn't respect your boundaries, that fucking person is not somebody who should be in your life, because boundaries should be respected. All right. So that's it for this episode.